This time on Engine Masters, we're gonna show you how to build a cheap street turbo LS the right way. Although chances are solid, you're not gonna agree. Watch and find out. This is Engine Masters, brought to you by AMSOIL, and I have to begin this episode by telling you what it's not. This is not one of those deals where a guy pulls a GM LS engine out of a junkyard, hangs a turbo on it, boosts its brains out, and makes 1,000 horsepower. I realize that is super common and super popular these days. As a matter of fact, way back in like 2010 or 2011 when I was the editor of Hot Rod magazine, I had Richard Holdner do a story called Big Bang Theory. Pull a 4.8 liter LS engine out of the yard and boost its brains out and make 1,200 horsepower before it's scattered. And as a matter of fact, it was his knowledge that helped me put together this whole engine package. So now I should tell you about what this episode actually is. My idea was to take a guy who wants to get on the Turbo LS bandwagon and show him how to put together a package that's really simple, doesn't cost a whole lot of money, and most of all, that is completely reliable on pump gas for anything that you could drive every single day. This isn't for a drag racer. This is more for somebody who just wants that daily reliability while making pretty huge power, but not 1,000. So in order to keep the budget down, let me tell you about what here is stock. This is a 5.3 liter GM LS engine, kind of like what you would find in a truck. It's got stock heads, stock block, stock crank, stock 78 millimeter throttle body. The intake manifold is a Dorman reproduction of a stock LS6 intake, and the main reason why I changed that is the truck intake is just so ugly. And this thing is 500 bucks at Summit Racing. You can get something cheaper than that, but I thought this was a really good option. So that's what's stock here, and that's where you're gonna save a lot of money. But now let me talk to you about what we did modify about this engine in the name of performance and reliability. I talked to Holdner about what usually breaks on these engines when he boosts them to the moon. What he's found is that the connecting rod is typically the failure point on these engines. The crankshaft seems to live forever, but he's breaking rods right in the middle here and then just shatter the entire engine as the broken connecting rod saws the whole block in half. So that's what can be really ugly. And for reliability, I am using this new product called a Boost Line rod. Google it, Boost Line. These things are intended specifically for power adder applications with a ton of beam strength. It's a 4340 forged rod, and it's got a new and patent pending design, which you can see it's kind of unusual here. It's kind of a cross between an H-beam and an I-beam, and they say that it's got 60% more bending resistance in the beam than other aftermarket rods. And you know what? These are way more affordable than the stuff I normally buy when I'm trying to make massive horsepower. And they say this thing will survive up to 2,000 horsepower. You can order an extra rod bolt upgrade on these, but we use the base ARP 2000 bolts in this application. I think it's gonna be way more rod than we need for what we're doing here. But really, this thing will let you grow. If you want to get beyond what you're going to see in this episode and you want to make huge horsepower, that thing will survive. The other thing that I did to the bottom end is upgraded pistons. This is a 2318 forging from Wiseco. It's an off-the-shelf piston that you can get for these LS turbo applications. I don't think it'll go to 2,000 horsepower, maybe 1,000, 1,500, but it's as trick as you need for what we're doing here. It has this new armor glide coating on the skirts, just scuff resistance there. What's probably more important up here is the armor plating, which is very hard to see on camera, but it's a proprietary coating that they say will prevent corrosion and has some detonation resistance to it. Definitely you don't want to be detonating with your turbo, but this gives you that added measure of protection. And the other thing about it is you can get it with lateral gas ports, and just to save a few bucks, we did not opt for that. But that is our super beefy piston. Both the piston and a rod are gonna let you grow your LS motor into big power if you ever want to. Now, speaking of big power, here's the performance upgrades that we made on this thing. First of all, a Brian Tooley Stage 2 camshaft, a very common stick for guys doing this Turbo LS deal. Naturally aspirated trim, it made about 415 horsepower on this thing with a carbureted intake manifold, but that's not really important. You'll see how well it works with the turbocharger. Now, the turbo itself we got from Little John Motorsports. You can call them and they'll advise you exactly what you need for your application, because if this is your first time, you're gonna need help deciding what size you need for your turbo. This one is a Borg-Warner S3E34. It's got an 80mm billet compressor wheel. On the exhaust side, we're looking at a 92mm turbine. We changed the housing to a T4 flange just because that's what we had the exhaust flanged for. It's got an AR of 1.25 to 1. I'll show you later in the show sort of a more budget option that you could do, but the thing about this turbo is it's gonna work great here, and once again, if you decide to step this thing way up, that turbo has got the reserve to make 1,000 or 1,200, no issues whatsoever. Now, the last thing that I did for a mod, which is really another key to simplicity, reliability, and on-the-street performance, is the Hooker cast iron exhaust manifolds. These things are designed specifically for turbo applications with all the flanges that you need. The thing that makes them better than a tubular exhaust is that they're much more quiet, they're not gonna crack, and they're gonna fit your chassis because they are tight. Honestly, they're gonna be a little bit of a power restriction. They're gonna make more back pressure than a tubular header design, but I think the compromise is worth it for something that you're gonna drive a lot, especially if you're not looking to just shoot for that 1,000 horsepower number. So, that's sort of the program that we got going on here. Now we're gonna roll it in the dyno, of course sauce it up with some AMSOIL, also for reliability. And in the tuning process, what we're gonna do is turn up the boost to the point where we're very confident it will run on 91 octane pump fuel. My priority is making this run on pump gas, and whatever that boost level is however much horsepower it's gonna make. Let's go find out. You know, we've been known to be irresponsible with boost on some nasty old engines, and AMSOIL has recommended the gnarly 60 weight Dominator racing oil in the past. But this LS engine is all fresh and good, tighter clearances and stuff like that. I'm still gonna use the Dominator because it's got that really strong film strength for impact loading, making, you know, big power under boost, but this one is a 1030 for the more modern and fresh engine. This thing's actually a used engine, but recently rebuilt with new beefy rods and pistons and stuff. My main goal with this episode is actually to convince him that boost is good.
I like boost. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but you won't have it in your own life.
I've had centrifugals, but I really must confess I've never done a turbo engine.
Okay. Then I have to convince you the turbos are good.
I'm ready for convincing.
What we're gonna find out right now is how good boost is and how bad no intercooler is.
They're quiet with turbos, that's one thing for sure.
Well, let's hear it. Crank that baby up.
We've got this thing all tuned up, so here's our first pull with no intercooler. All right, what we just saw in our first pull there with no intercooler at all is impressive. 664 horsepower at 6,500, 573 pound-feet of torque at 5,300, and we saw 11.7 PSI all the way up at the top. But did you see the air inlet temperature?
Oh yeah, it was hideously hot.
Yeah, exactly. I think 67 degrees in the dyno cell and 190 plus going into the engine out of the turbo.
It's horrible.
You've seen what goes wrong with that, haven't you?
Yes, unfortunately, I've seen the smoke come out, and we actually had an engine with an intercooler. Intercooler started leaking, we turned it off. Next pull, the smoke's coming out.
On 91 octane?
On 91 octane, with just simply detonation.
So what does that train you where the actual limit is? I mean, I see guys drive around with no intercooler at 10 PSI in that area all the time. How come they're not having issues?
I don't know that there's a definitive number because I think that obviously a turbocharger applies boost differently than maybe a roots blower does. I'm not willing to run one here with these kind of torque numbers on 91.
Yeah, well, anytime you're compressing air, you're creating heat, so
Right.
more boost, more heat, more danger of detonation.
Does it correlate to BMEP number at all?
Well, BMEP at our altitude anyway, because this is an observed number, not corrected. So A lot of times what we would see in a normal 91 octane motor would be, let's say, normally aspirated in the 160s. We're in the 260s now. So there's a lot of potential for detonation, in my opinion.
And that's why we actually have Rocket brand 118 octane race fuel in it right now, just because we knew this test was going to be risky. But right now, I guess we'll go throw the intercooler on there and see how much of a difference it makes.
Intercoolers are good.
It's going to be really good. Yeah.
It'll be better.
Let's throw it on there. Well, that was like the worst of both worlds. We made mediocre power, and you couldn't run it on pump gas because the air discharge temperature was so high, it was just gonna have a detonation problem and be a disaster. So our next step is an A/B test with an air-to-water intercooler, and I anticipate that once we cool down that discharge temperature, we're also gonna have to make a little adjustment to the air-fuel ratio, and then we'll find out how much power that makes. I've often run boost of like 8 to 12 pounds with a carburetor and no intercooler, and that's because a carburetor has fuel passing through it in a vaporized state that actually pulls heat out of the air and acts as an intercooler, and you can get away with it. Clearly with EFI, you don't have that situation, and so we're gonna see a good A/B test between hot discharge air and cool discharge air. Here's another thing. I recently discovered this filter from a company called Air Raid, and this is their full race turbo air filter that has no filter element at all. No gauze, no paper. This is just the metal screens, inner and outer. It's really only meant to keep out the huge rocks, but not reduce airflow, which then restricts boost, which then kills power. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it led me to want to try all their filters. So now we got to roll into the dyno cell, hang the intercooler, find out what power that makes, and then we're gonna run through all these filters and see if they make a difference. So what we're about to install here is an air-to-water intercooler. This thing's actually made by ProCharger, a centrifugal supercharger company. It has a little radiator in here, and there's water that cycles through it, and the air comes in here, goes through that radiator and gets chilled, and then gets discharged into the engine. In this case, we're just gonna run the water through the dyno, so it's just sort of like room temperature water. It can be way better when you run hardcore ice water through it in like a drag race application.
There you go. This one goes in here.
This one goes down here.
Pretty close there.
Okay, we are intercooled. We are heat exchanged.
That's what we needed.
We're gonna make more power with less boost.
I know. I hardly ever run boost though, I guess.
I know, you need to.
Yeah.
Okay, in theory, we're gonna see boost go down and power go up, right?
Yep.
And we're gonna be able to look at the temperature delta across
Yes.
the intercooler. That's gonna be cool.
How did that look?
I don't know. Let's find out what happened. Look at the data. Okay, that was pretty cool, literally. We made 698 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, not 700.
Oh.
Down here, the torque went up to 623 at 5,300 RPM. And if you compare the red line with no intercooler to the black line with the intercooler, you can see that that was a significant gain.
The intercooler is pretty good.
It's great.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at why that happened. First, can we look at our boost curves to see how that might have changed with and without the intercooler? There you go.
This is the boost curve. On the red line, that was the first run without the intercooler, and the pressure was a bit higher at 11.9 peak. And it dropped about a half a pound, but it's only a half a pound difference, and we saw almost, 40 horsepower gain with a half pound. So obviously the air going into the engine is much more dense.
Which is why it makes less boost. The cooler air is denser, which means the molecules are closer, so it's taking up less space in the intake manifold, so the boost is lower.
Yeah, that's sometimes a hard concept when you say the boost is lower, but it made more power. And it'll happen sometimes when the NA portion of the engine is more efficient, or it also happens when the air inlet charge is cooler.
I think everybody's looking at that and going, okay, but why would less boost make more power? So let's look at the temperature curve.
Yeah. So we'll look at that. And basically this is with the intercooler. Since we had no intercooler the first time, basically we had
One discharge temp, and that's it.
we had 192 degrees going in the engine.
Yeah.
So we dropped it, 90 degrees.
With no intercooler at all, it was 192 degrees straight out of the turbo, really hot. And then what we're seeing here is, on that last pull, we had 181 degrees coming out of the turbocharger. But then coming out of the intercooler, it was only 94, so that's a 100-degree drop.
That is a big drop.
That's significant.
There's a lot more to it than just power. I mean, detonation tolerance is a big factor when you drop inlet air temperature.
Also, we were able to burn more fuel. You went into the Holley EFI and ticked it up quite a bit. And it's the burning more fuel that makes more power, not the air.
That's exactly it. And somebody might look at this and say, well, how come the air out of the turbo is different in those two cases? Had we preloaded the turbo just a little bit prior to making that run, it would have gone up even another 10 degrees. So the longer you run that thing, the higher that temperature is going to get. As you can see, it's an ascending curve. And that's just in a few seconds. So think about running this thing for 30 seconds wide open or at Bonneville or something. I mean, it just keeps going up, and then that's when it starts to rattle and there's no turning back.
That's when the engine just hits the ground.
What's surprising to me also is it's not a constant delta as far as temperature drop with the intercooler. The slope is just about flat on the intercooled temperature graph.
Even though this continues to increase, this is at a more shallow slope.
It's increasing at a much slower rate. I mean, it's hardly increasing at all over the length of that run.
That's because it's joining the temperature of the water going through the heat exchanger, and that temperature is stable.
Intercoolers are cool.
Intercoolers are great. Okay, the next thing I want to do is super simple. I always see guys at Drag Week run around with no air filter on their turbo at all. And I know from experience at Wreck Stuff, the F-bomb turbos are garbage as a result of that.
Well, yeah, it'll crunch parts.
Yeah. I have 4 different air cleaners. Air Raid makes 4 different types of air filters. They make a actual drive it around every day and keep dirt out. Then they make a dry version of the same thing. Then they have a track day one, which filters fewer particles but flows more air. Then they have a race day one that has no element in it at all.
Just to stop the big rocks.
Right. I want to go throw on the most street-oriented filter and find out how much that turns the boost down, and then find out if we can recover it by bringing boost back up.
Okay.
So let's slap that filter on. Okay, so Air Raid makes this filter in both a 4-inch diameter and a 6-inch diameter opening right here. Unfortunately, our turbo here is 5, so we've got this 3D printed adapter that we're gonna slide on here, and then we're gonna put the filter on and find out if it is gonna reduce boost and kill power. Okay. So this is the oiled element filter.
All right, this is gonna be great.
Okay, all we did is put an air filter on it. It's gonna restrict airflow, reduce boost, kill power, make it run rich.
If this is a high flow enough filter, then it won't. So it'll be interesting to see how much and if it restricts air.
Well, I mean, make a prediction here.
Oh wow, he's just going right there.
It's easy for the guy that's never seen a turbo to do. Challenge me.
Going right for the jugular.
No,
I don't think this thing's gonna make any difference.
I think it's gonna kill a pound or 2.
Look, Steve-O, I'm certainly no turbo expert, so there was nothing personal there. I'm a carburetor big cam guy too.
I'm feeling a little tender after that.
Okay, so now we're gonna run it with the Air Raid oiled element filter on there. Wow, pretty good.
I was watching the air fuel pretty close. It didn't get a whole bunch richer, so I'm knowing that it had to be making decent power.
That filter flows a lot. I mean, what did it do? Same exact thing? Yeah, I mean, it lost 2 or 3 numbers or something like that and almost no boost at all. 0.2 pounds of boost. That's a good filter.
That is a good filter, not very restrictive at all.
Wow, I'm actually impressed with that filter. So that's the difference in this curve right here between the boost with and without the filter. And the difference is 0.2 PSI. We can go out there and turn a little knob on our little organized leak boost controller and solve that problem.
That's a really good filter.
Let's try the dry one. Maybe the dry one's more restrictive than the oiled one.
Yeah, we should try it. I mean, that would be interesting.
Let's try it. I'm gonna go put on the dry element. So now we're gonna try the dry gauze Air Raid filter. Any variance that we saw in that test came down to a few degrees of air temperature, a few degrees of water temperature. Insignificant. You want to go put the screen on?
Screen? Yeah.
So I think all we really learned is that none of those filters are a restriction for something at this power level and boost.
They were all pretty much equal.
Yeah. They'd be pretty cool though. I like that filter that has no element in it, just the screen for those guys who are making like 2,000 horsepower plus.
At least something to drive with. I mean, that just seems kind of crazy to me that they would run around with nothing.
Yep.
And that's a pretty big filter, too. I mean, a lot of guys put a much smaller filter on a turbo, and maybe that's where you're going to run into problems with restriction.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's why a lot of guys don't run filters. They think they're going to kill boost. But what do you think of the combo? Pretty simple, right?
It's simple but good.
Yeah, I
And
know.
it's tiny. It's a 5.3.
I know, it's 325 cubic inches, 5.3 liters. I think a lot of people, though, are sitting there going, you didn't make 1,000 horsepower. What is wrong with you idiots?
And what do you think about the potential reliability of that power level with this engine?
Well, that was my whole plan for it. I think the cast manifolds don't crack or make noise. I think that those pistons and rods live absolutely forever at this power level. I think the MLS head gaskets just don't even care about this boost level and power level.
This is something you're still going to be driving with 700 horsepower 5 years from now.
Right, it's an everyday engine. It's cool.
I like the whoosh it makes, too.
The whoosh?
The whoosh.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's go whoosh it off the dyno.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing I learned in this episode is intercoolers are really, really good. I knew they were good, I didn't realize how good.
Right.
The other cool thing is none of those filters made a bit of difference at this boost and power level.
Just tells me they're all good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't run a motor without a filter of some sort anyway, because you'll just trash the motor and the turbo.
Oh, but you know what, Dulcich?
What?
I have 2 bits of breaking news for you.
Okay, I'm all ears. What have you got?
I know you haven't heard this stuff. So first of all, you know Little John Motorsports spec'd this for like way more power than we're making right here.
Yeah, okay.
So off camera, I was talking to Holdner. We're gonna step it up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we're talking about going tubular headers, some TFS heads, an Edelbrock Pro Flow intake big throttle body, and 1,200 horsepower.
Wow. I'm really liking what I'm hearing.
Well, that's why I stepped it up hardcore with those Wiseco pistons and the boost line rods.
It's just too easy to make horsepower.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you just slap one of those round things on there and then boom, you're
It
a
just happens.
superhero.
Here's my second bit of breaking news.
Okay.
So I think we've established this turbo is really perfect for what we're doing here, but there are other options for people at this power level, and there's a new product for it. For those guys who don't want a Chinese turbo, which is like the standard, Precision Turbo. They have this new entry-level turbo just for guys doing stock 5.3s and 4.8s.
Oh, yeah?
It's their 7675 unit. It's $999, but it has a 12-month, 20,000-mile warranty. So that's the turbo, and they also came out with these new affordable blow-off valves and wastegates. It's a 46-millimeter wastegate, 64-millimeter blow-off valve. So they're basically jumping into the game of the guys who want to do the junkyard turbo thing, but at a higher level with, again, that reliability that I've been talking about.
Okay, so good stuff, but affordable, right?
Yeah. But the question is, do you think that I'm completely weak sauce with this combo only making 700, or do you kind of get where I'm going with this?
700 horsepower is a lot on the street in a real car.
Yeah.
1,200 is a lot more, though.
Although I will say one more thing, which is there's a lot of guys I'm seeing who are like, oh, it doesn't make 1,000 horsepower, you're lame. I think a lot of those guys, if you put them in a street car with 700 horsepower and 1,000, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference because it's just a matter of how much more wheel speed there is in the burnout.
I think I probably could.
Really? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll let you find out when we make this thing make like 1,200 horsepower, which I hope you'll see in a future episode of Engine Masters presented by AMSOIL. Let's try the dry one. Maybe the dry one's more restricted than the oiled one. Can I?
I want to try the screen one.
You can do anything you want, Dave.
Why do I feel like I'm being like, you know, patronized?
No.